The Navajo Reservation in Arizona had long had reports of all manner of strange goings-on beyond the scope of what ordinary law enforcement is trained to deal with, including ghosts, Bigfoot, UFOs, and shape-shifting creatures known as skinwalkers. Rather than dismiss these cases, the Navajo Reservation assigned a special branch of their police department to look into them, consisting of a group of specially trained federal officers. And they've handled less than 1% of the cases were paranormal cases, but they went on and took them seriously and recognized them as worthy to investigate, which I think that's very, very commendable. Jonathan Dover will join us tonight to share the inner workings of the Navajo Rangers, along with some of his most intriguing cases. Jonathan is a retired 31-year law enforcement veteran who has worked with the Winslow, Arizona Police Force, Navajo Nation Rangers. He was trained in criminal investigations and was an archaeological resources crimes investigator. He is also trained as an EMT. He's trained in SWAT, hazardous materials, search and rescue. He was an instructor in police firearms training, and he specializes in high-angle technical rescue, which I find very interesting. During his work on Navajo Nation's lands, both he and his longtime partner, Stanley Milford Jr., were assigned over a period of 10 years to officially investigate and document significant cases involving Bigfoot, the paranormal, Navajo witchcraft, and UFOs. So tonight, please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Jonathan Dover.
Okay, can everybody hear me all right? We're going to have a little bit of fun tonight, and we've got a lot of ground to cover. Just so you know, I am a certified police instructor, and I also have taught at Gunsight Academy. This is the big academy over in Paulden, Arizona. That was set up by Jeff Cooper. If those of you who know who Jeff Cooper is, he is considered the guru of the 45. So one of the best firearms training schools in the world, actually. What we're going to do, and you'll have to excuse me if you're young looking and you start falling asleep, we're going to have you drop and give us 25 push-ups. Because this is what we do to our people when we train them, or we have them run all over the place and then come back and try to qualify. So that's always fun to do. But like I said, we've got lots and lots of interesting things to go through. So my partner can't make it. He has been the director for the Rangers Department, the acting director, for about 2 years straight now. They just recently hired on a new director, so he's the acting lieutenant now. I finished there as a lieutenant. My training, just to give you some background, my police academy training went for 6 months. So 760 hours of training. I was certified in Arizona, in the state of New Mexico, and on the Navajo Reservation as a federal officer. So I guess that makes me qualified to some degree. Okay, we have a disclaimer, and we put this in front of every slide, every show, so that essentially what it is that these are our opinions, these are our cases that we're going to relate to you. We do not represent the Navajo Nation, any of its department or programs or anything else, and that just keeps us out of the lawsuit area. These are our Hollywood pictures, and it's so cool because we're right next to Hollywood. This is where they go over your face and take all the blemishes out and make you look really pretty. So that's Stan. They quietly told him we would like you not to speak about these things anymore because, you're the acting director. And so he said, okay, he got the drift. So we're going to start out real quickly, and we're just going to blaze through some of this stuff so we can get to the good stuff. This is the Navajo Nation. There's Arizona, New Mexico. So all up in northeastern Arizona, northwestern New Mexico, up into Utah. We have, and you guys can read, I know you can, largest Indian reservation in the United States, 27,000 square miles. It's about 400,000 people up there right now, tribal members. So we get to show you some scenic pictures right off the bat. This is the confluent of the Little Colorado River and the Colorado. And that is the natural color of that water. You're looking at about 15 feet deep right there. And it's crystal clear. It'll drive you nuts if you're a fisherman because you can see big fish swimming around down there. This is Lee's Ferry. For those of you who have never heard of it, they have trophy trout there. And they said that hooking into a 10 or 15 pound trout is an everyday occurrence. Landing one is not. My best there has been 7.5 pounds. It took me a half hour to bring it in. And both my arms are cramped up. I had to quit fishing afterwards. Here's Shiprock, New Mexico. This is near the place of emergence for the Navajos. This is a nice little slot canyon called Antelope Canyon. It looks beautiful. A lot of people come in there and take pictures, and you can take a guided tour through there. Several years back, they had a flash flood that showed up. It rained about 30 miles away. The water from the flash flood came into that canyon and dropped in. It hit the tourists so hard that it blew their clothes off. 7 of them were killed, all of them from France. This is some of the ground that we get to travel on a day-to-day basis. Of course, you have John Ford's mittens up in Monument Valley. And this is our ranger patch. That badge I got to design back in 2000. So this is what the rangers looked like back in the late 60s. And that's what they looked like about 2001. That good-looking guy was me when I was a sergeant. And then Stan is right there. All our rangers are trained as wildland firefighters because we have to operate in the fire environments. Every year we had to take a 40-pound pack test. That's 40 pounds of pack or weight on you, walking as fast as you can walk. If you break into a jog, you're disqualified. And that's just to see if you can get out of the fire alive. That's what a forest fire looks like, a range fire. That's State Route 264 between Ganado and Window Rock. That fire jumped all the way across this highway and started fire on the other side. That's a color picture of the aftermath. We have different training. This gentleman does not work for our department anymore, so we blacked out his face so that keep his identity secret. That canteen there is about 700 years old. Seized from a gentleman. This is my specialty. I was one of only 2 federal officers doing these kind of cases in the entire United States. And this was seized by a guy that he was trying to sell it for the cost of a 6-pack. Here's Poncho House. We had a Boy Scout troop that came in one time, and there's a really tall tower in here. They decided to push the tower over. And we know the Boy Scout troop number, but because they were nice enough to spray paint it on the side. So, you know, what can you say? These are not like Mesa Verde. They're not cemented in or anything. There's no reconstruction work that's done on them. That pottery there is anywhere from 700 to 900 years old. I guarantee you, if you leave a soda can out there within 6 months, it'll be silver looking. All the paint will be gone. Archaeologists today still don't know how they did, what they mixed to make these paints. We take care of flash flooding. If you look real close, you can see a rope all the way out. This guy thought he could make it through the water. At this point, the water is receding. It was actually up, half of his tailgate was covered. We do snow operations, ATV operations. So there's a lot of camping involved. And to this day, I hate camping. In our winter snow emergencies, can you tell who's working out there? This guy couldn't even get going. It was so muddy. We had to wait until 2 in the morning to get in with supplies. He's carrying food and coal and everything else into people. Believe it or not, the elderly people that were contacted, we asked them, do you have water? They just pointed to all the snow. We asked them, do you have wood? They says, yeah, right under that tarp. Do you have food? And they show us all the dried corn, everything else. You know who needed the rescue? 20-something years olds. Because they could not get out that night in their little Hyundai and go get pizza. Environmental emergencies. This is one of our patrols where you just sit up on a point like this with binoculars and look and look and look, and you have to lay there for quite some time, and you're looking for any movement out there on what might be going on. That good-looking guy is me. This is Operation Black Flag. We are actually going into the backcountry, and we're looking for dumps. People have dumps out in their backyard, basically, and we're looking for methamphetamine production. And of course, horseback patrol. I know just about enough about horses to get myself hurt. This is the fun stuff. That's me back there. And being a firearms instructor, I got to, these are, for those of you who are interested, these are H&K Fast 20s, semi-automatic shotguns. They 8 rounds as fast as you can pull the trigger. And that's some of our SWAT gear. That's Stan. We were the only outfit that was authorized to do what they call S&S transport. This is the Strategic National Medical Supply. So if there was an anthrax, the foreign country dropped anthrax over here, we would be escorting the Cipro to the hospitals because they don't want it to be hijacked and sold on the black market. I'm a technical accident investigator, so this is a picture that's near and dear to my heart. That's what happens when a truck hits a cow. And that's Godzilla. We got him for free from Luke Air Force Base, and 4,000 original miles on it. And he goes in the backcountry and drops off wood to people that need it. Some of our other equipment, we have forward-looking infrared systems. And this one, we're escorting a group of speleo people underground into a cavern. This is the entrance to the cavern. This is about halfway down looking back up. And we asked that guy, you know what's down there? And we said, nothing but fear. Some of these rocks here are as big as a mobile home. And they're cantilevered, which means that you can go up to them and grab it with your hand and push, and they rock. Very dangerous cave. The entrance is about 50 yards, and the length of it down here is about the size of a football field. The roof is about 75 feet up. Of course, Navajo Mountain from Lake Powell. And there's my favorite picture because that was my boat. We had two of these. So that was the boat I got to drive all the time. We had to go 80 miles across the water up a river, the San Juan River, to look for a body. We did the Red Bull Air Race up in Monument Valley. First time, you've seen these guys on TV, but the first time these guys ever flew over dry land. And that's some of our cool equipment. If you like guns, I love guns, so they kept me alive all these years. So we're going to get right into it, the paranormal. We're going to talk about the night before the Phoenix Lights. A lot of you have heard about the Phoenix Lights, this big mile-wide thing that flew over Phoenix and violated airspace over the Phoenix International Airport. It was also, believe it or not, a lot of people don't realize that it was contacted by two F-16 jets that flew out of Luke Air Force Base. During that time, when they said that this craft shot a blue beam across the front of them. And when that happened, the pilots understood it to mean standoff. And so they landed their aircraft. One of them had to be helped out of the cockpit because he couldn't stand on his own. So this is where I live, Loop, Arizona. And you can see that we have a lot of trees out there. This is one of the streets near my residence. You don't get to see where I live because I don't want you showing up there at 1 in the morning. But what we had was one night we had these series of lights, 6 or 7 of these, following each other, going in a counterclockwise direction along the horizon, about 10 miles out. And they just kept circling and circling and circling for about 40 minutes. And we watched these. And as we watched them, the whole neighborhood brought lawn chairs out. And everybody turned out the lights of their houses, and they sat and watched. And we thought that all the news medias were going to come out there the next day, and we were going to get flooded with news people. That next day, the Phoenix Lights happened, and just kind of took the wind out of everything out there. We have Bigfoot on the reservation. And this is actually how we got into investigating these things. Some people up in Bloomfield, New Mexico contacted the police department. And I'm getting a little, who handles the sound? Maybe we can take it down just a hair. I'm getting a little ring from the speakers. And so I don't want to have any feedback up here because I'm like you guys, I wear a hearing aid. And when you have a hearing aid on and that thing squeals, it drives you nuts. Thank you. So this is, we had that case happen. 30 people witnessed Bigfoot. They go to the police department, which is the Navajo police. The Navajo police lieutenant, with a reporter standing there, asked them, "How much of you guys had to drink?" Ha 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 ha. So the people wouldn't have anything to do with the police department. They called the Rangers department. And we sent 6 people out there for 3 nights and 4 days. And we went out there and did the investigation. We found tracks like this. This gives a false image, false color image. That track is 22 inches long. We found hair samples. We sent them off for analysis. DNA analysis came back unknown carnivore. These footsteps here, you can't really tell, but it's going up about a 40-degree slope. You would be on your hands and your feet crawling up this thing. That's how steep it is. It took 5-foot strides going up this slope. If I did a 5-foot stride, I'd have to do the splits, and believe me, I can't do them anymore. So, you can't imitate something like that. There's some tracks. A nurse was on her way to work in Chin-Lee, and this thing ran in front of her vehicle. And you can see where it's going through here. Again, pretty much 5-foot strides. Anytime we do these investigations, we get a lot of police officers that come out because they want to see all the cool stuff. There's the plaster casts of some of those tracks. And Stan was out on an investigation, and he hears coming up from the bottom, snap, crack, crackle, crackle, snap, coming through the trees, through the pine trees. This thing was throwing rocks at them that were landing about 15 to 20 feet away from them. When they found out where this thing was throwing them from, it was 100 yards down the hill. And that's pretty accurate throwing. If it had hit one of them, it would have probably killed them. I'm often asked, what's the strangest thing that's ever happened to me? In all the years, 31 years is a long time. So I'm going to tell you about it. This is under the title of missing time, but it's actually, it has something to do with time. From Loop, Arizona, this is Flagstaff over here. This is Tuba City. And from Loop, traveling up Navajo Route 2, it's 47 miles. And you get to Kaikotsmavi. From there, you go across another 56 miles to Tuba City. Okay, so a lot of you mathematicians out there, time, distance, right? This is what we were taught in school. I'm going at an average speed of 65 miles an hour. I leave before it's daybreak. I get up here to a place called Navajo Wash. I look behind me, or I look in front of me, and there's nothing but a straight road. Now the sun is just coming up. It's what they call a pre-dawn. So the sun is just barely below the horizon, but the horizon is getting light. And if I looked in the rear view mirror, it's a similar picture. And I remember thinking, that's a long straight highway. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, I was coming to a sharp right turn. This right turn is near Coal Mine Mesa, which is approximately 15 miles from where I started to blink. Now, I thought, obviously, I just went on cruise control, right? And I just autopilot, so to speak. They didn't have Teslas back then. So I get to Tuba City, and I'm coming in from this side. Up at the top here is a McDonald's. Now, I'm sorry, I'm one of these people that ate frozen burritos from 7-Eleven as I'm driving down the road, and McDonald's had a breakfast in the morning that was quick. So now I'm a little more health conscious, even though I don't want to live forever. Because that's the thing, right? If you're eating really healthy, you're afraid to die. You don't want to get old, and But believe me, as you get older, it gets more fun. So right across from the McDonald's up here is the fleet management right in this area. That's where I get my oil changed. So I did this drive once a month. And I have got it timed down perfectly so I can get in the drive-through, get my sandwich, get a cup of coffee, go sit at the gate just as they're coming to open it up at 8 in the morning. When I got there, I got my coffee, I got my sandwich, I went to wait at the gate. I was 45 minutes early. I don't know how I gained 45 minutes of time. I've had people tell me, oh, you were abducted by aliens and they dropped you off in the wrong time. I've been told you crossed the event horizon of a microscopic black hole and it altered time. I haven't heard of anything yet that makes any sense, but I have had it experience missing time, but this is the only time I've had gain time. So I think a lot of us wish we had gain time. You know, we could go do a lot of other things. We have the old man case. This was one of the first cases that we had involving UFOs, and we covered everybody's face because when we do these investigations, we tell people we will not reveal your identities. It's very important to us because a lot of Navajos will not talk to anybody if they know that you're going to tell everyone who they are. So they won't talk. So they agreed to talk to us. These two guys on the side, how many of you heard of Robert Bigelow? Okay. Bigelow, for those of you who not in the know, I'm sure everybody here knows, was the recipient of about $24 million of taxpayer money to do the aerial threat identification for the U.S. government. Being a private individual, he is not required to release any information to the public on something that's taxpayer funded. So that's what they do, is they compartmentalize these things. And he was even investigating stuff involving dimensional travel and stargates, and it's amazing, faster than light travel, FTL. And he's building the onboard modules for the space station. They're made out of Kevlar. They fold them up, and then when they get up there, they just air them up and they expand. So this is the old man. He's in his 80s, and his wife. This is the house. We even blacked out the windows. What he sees late at night is this object. He said it's about 25, 30 feet in diameter. And this thing is, he thought, it was so bright, he thought somebody was coming to the house. There's no electricity out there, no running water, no plumbing, nothing. And so he sees these lights and he goes out to see who's coming up the road. And he sees this thing up in the air. This is just a representation, not the real thing. These solar lights are going to come into the picture very quickly here. But he's looking out the window. He said that this craft landed up on the ridgeline about a quarter mile away from him. And he sees this object coming down toward him. As he's standing there, his dog, it's kind of a blue heeler mix, a little spotted, and it runs out, barking, 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 gets up there, and in the dark he hears yipe, and this dog comes running back, curls up by the house, and never moves from there. So he starts thinking, hey, something's not right. So he goes inside and locks the door. And he's looking outside the window, and this is pretty much what he describes, is something about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. He says it's either wearing white or a light gray skin-tight outfit on it. It's got a big head, black eyes, says that they didn't blink. Now he's telling us this in Navajo, And to give you some idea, for those of you who are not familiar with the Navajo language, the Navajo people have an oral tradition. This means that history is handed down orally. What's interesting about oral tradition, the US government said, oh, all Indian tribes are savages. They are uncivilized because they don't have a written language. Believe it or not, in an oral tradition, you cannot add to the story, you cannot take away from the story, you cannot change anything. You have to tell it exactly as it was told. Exactly. In a ceremony, you may have over 250 songs sang over 3 nights. They have to be done exactly. If they are not, the whole ceremony's no good. And people pay thousands of dollars for that ceremony. So the oral tradition here, this old man, he told us what had happened, and we taped him. After we were done, several months later, we re-interviewed him with a different group. And he told the exact same story, almost word for word. Never added, never embellished, never took anything away. 2 years later, we interviewed him a third time. And the story, again, was exactly the same. Talk about a great witness, huh? So these things, he said that they had almost like a flashlight looking object, but he said the beam that came out was about 1 inch in diameter, and it was collimated like a laser, and they were shining around. One had a blue one green, one yellow, one red, and they were shining it around. There were 4 of them looking around like they lost something on the ground. And as they would come up to these solar lights, they would gather around it. They were just fascinated by these solar lights. And as they gathered around it, this light has its own battery source, and the light would start getting dim and get dim and get dim and go out. And then they'd all get back and step back from it, and the light would come back on. He says then they'd get close to it again. And it just kept going out like that. And so in Navajo, there's no word for alien. So he's saying, what are these little children doing around my house at midnight? What are these children doing here? And he kept watching them and watching them. And they went out to the outhouse and looked around. They came back following these lights. That's me and one of the other officers doing a ground search of the area. He decides to go out and confront these little children. And so he goes out the door and goes around the back of the house, because that's what you do to sneak up on somebody, right? And he came up behind them, and as he's coming around the back of the house, he tripped on the steps. Now, those of you that are young, you know that when you trip and you're 80 years old, you can break things real easy. Well, this guy is so tough, he fell over and he doesn't remember how long he was on the ground, but as he looked up, he says these things were heading up through these trees, not making a sound. He says you could just see them like they were gliding up the hill. And so he got up and went back inside. We got some people there from the environmental protection to do background radiation readings. They put on these white Tyvek suits. Interestingly enough, this dog, this Rottweiler here, had pups. When we were there, she's got a big chain, and we thought that chain was going to snap because she was just trying to kill us, And but that night that this thing showed up, this dog never came out of the doghouse. And interestingly enough, also, the other dog, the pup that yiped, it actually, one of these guys in the white Tyvek went up to it was a lady, and she goes, "Come here, come here, come here, boy, come here." You know, she's a dog lover. Me and Stan were pushing it away because it was trying to lick us to death, and but it had muddy paws, and we were wearing uniforms. And you know, if you wear a uniform, you don't like mud all over yourself. So there's a group of us, some MUFON investigators from Arizona, from Phoenix. There's the mom that was, and you could see pretty big, hefty chain there. And there's the pup. Like I said, we keep their identity secret. Anyway, this we didn't realize it, but 2 weeks after this incident, this dog died. So, you know, we don't know what it was hit with. We were not informed, otherwise we could have had a necropsy done and find out what kind of damage it had sustained. We didn't find out until a couple of months later. We found these unusual marks here. And they go off in a straight line, or just, you know, in a line, one after the other. And we found some indistinct marks in the ground. There's one of Bigelow's investigators. And interestingly enough, a lot of Bigelow's investigators are all ex-special forces and ex-military. Taking GPS readings. And this picture illustrates a neighbor. His sister lives about a half-mile away from him. She had about 8 of these puppies, kind of like that. They were at that stage where they're little small, just learning how to walk. They're all roly-poly and falling all over the place. And that night, all 8 of those pups disappeared. Now, we went over there and looked. If it was a fox, if it was a coyote, if it was any bobcat, anything, there would have been fur scattered all over the place. And, you know, with 8 of them disappearing at the same time, we think that that was related. And as we can see, skinwalkers, just keep you on your toes. We have Skinwalkers by Tony Hillerman. He wrote a book on it. We have movies with our favorite heroes who are playing Indians. Everybody thinks a skinwalker is a wolf man. Or, you know, we see the Hollywood version, you know, that's supposed to strike fear into you when you're sitting in the movie theater and make you run out and go buy more popcorn. We have the Ferranzetta type, you know, illustrations. And it makes you look very, very dramatic and evil and all this stuff. In reality, the skinwalker is much different. So we are going to talk about the skinwalker. I usually pause at this point, and we ask if any Navajos are in here and they feel really uneasy about this subject, they can go take a coffee break for a few minutes and then come back. So, and just to give you an idea, both me and Stan have been attacked just for speaking about this subject. These things can kill very easily. They can poison, they can curse you. Stan, we got done talking about this one day, and he felt like somebody stuck a knife in his back and just twisted it back and forth. And he had a remote healer that lives in Tucson work on him. And that remote healer was able to alleviate that pain. And he says they're watching you every time you talk. We spoke out of a radio station in Maine, and we were on the phone out of Gallup. As we were speaking, when we got to this subject, they said that their whole radio station just went to static. And as soon as we finished talking about it, they came back on the air. So all kinds of interesting things. The first time we spoke about it was in Oregon, at McMinimus, or at McMinnville, Oregon. And after we got done, Stan and my families had 9 near head-on collision or intersection accidents in our families in the next weekend. And then on top of that, Stan almost got hit head-on by another car, and I got run off the road doing 75 miles an hour by an 18-wheeler. And I like to pat myself on the back because I was fishtailing back and forth at 75, and I was hitting the gas, hitting the brakes, steering left, steering right, and I managed to keep that vehicle on the road. So that's pursuit driving training. So this is a skin that was found. It had been laying out there for some time. Okay, we're not talking about hauntings yet, but we'll get there. Just lean it up. Yeah, there you go. We're gonna get there. But a power line crew found this one. You will, if you go online and Google this, this is what you'll come up with. That is not a skinwalker. That is a Yebiche dancer for a Navajo ceremony. This is not a skinwalker. This is a gentleman who's going through a healing ceremony. That sand painting that's on the ground will be destroyed after they're done. The skinwalker will dress, if you can imagine a man or a woman has a skin of an animal that they want to change into. So that skin is wrapped around them somewhere. They usually have a loincloth, although I have heard in the case of a couple of women, they were naked from the waist down. They paint themselves. If you took a sponge and put white paint on it, like latex, like you'd use in your house, and you just blotched it all over your body, even your face, your hair, everything. And after a while it dries and it cracks. That's what they look like. And they carry usually a bag that has a lot of their stuff in it. They carry either a piece of reed or a bone. The bone is traditionally made out of a human bone that's hollowed out. And they put what they call corpse powder in it that's ground up from the corpses of people and the bones of people and other poisons that are included in it. If you get too close to it, it'll take this stuff and spray it right in your face. And that thing will kill you either overnight or very slowly over a couple of days. So, nothing to laugh about. They can run. We have had reports of them running alongside vehicles. Stan had one running alongside his vehicle, and he's doing 65 miles an hour. I had a kid that was, and him and his sister were on the road, and one of them was following their car, and they kept speeding up and speeding up. Pretty soon they were doing 75, and this thing was keeping up with them on 2 legs. We've had reports of people just driving down the highway, and these are not Navajos. Somebody's driving down the highway outside of Winslow. They see somebody painted white standing on the side of the road, and they said as they watched, this thing dropped down on its hands in front and ran on its hands and its feet across the road faster than an animal would run. So they are said to travel incredible distances overnight. They can take the form of a coyote, or a wolf, which is mostly what's seen. In one case that we'll talk about, we had a guy that sees this outside his door. And for those of you who might be interested in his story, you'll find it under Haas lore. Haas wrote a book about the skinwalkers. But what happened to him, and he was on Coast to Coast talking about this, he goes out and sees this coming into his garage, something like this. He says it was mangy, fur was falling out, covered in dust. He took a 2x4 and whack, hit it as hard as he could. He says it went down, it was on the floor, its bowels released, its urine came out. So he says, obviously dead, right? Goes in, and because us guys, what do? Got to brag to the ladies, right? He goes into his wife. Look what I did. The wife says, I don't believe you, show me. Because that's what women do. And they go outside, and the dog is gone. He got sick that night, and he got sicker and sicker. And he said that he was crapping out one end and vomiting out the other, and just felt like he was going to die. His wife and the neighbor and the son grabbed him and carried him out to the truck and put him in, and they traveled, I would say about, 30, 60, 70, 80, about almost 100 miles to go see a medicine man. And the medicine man and the guy and the wife took him into the hogan. The little boy that went with them did not go in with them. He asked that boy later on, why didn't you come in with us? And that little boy says, I didn't want to go in with you guys in that evil thing. He says, there was nothing else there. But that little boy saw another figure going in with them, and he said it looked evil. The medicine man told him that the skinwalker, when he hit this thing, and the dust flew up, he says, you inhale that dust, and that's how he delivered the poison. And he says, if you had come to me a few hours later, he says, you would have been dead by morning. And he gave him some stuff to drink and sang over him, sent him back. And Haas said later on, it was just like snap, he woke up and he was back to normal. So the medicine man knew they can come in the form of an owl or any bird, even ravens. This is a female hogan. This is what most people live in on the reservation. And the doorway always faces to the east. In the Navajo tradition, when you get up in the morning before daybreak, you take your corn pollen and you stand in the doorway and you greet the rising sun. And you take the corn pollen and say your prayers for the 4 directions. We have found hogans from the 1920s, 1930s that have the doors facing to the west. And the sweat lodge also faces to the west, the little sweat house. And the people from historic preservation would not go into these places, the cultural specialists. And they told us that this is where witchcraft was taught. And so this was basically cursed ground. So we're going to talk about the O.R.D case. This is another UFO case. This one was included as part of one of the MUFON investigations in their periodical that comes out. We're looking at Flagstaff this direction. We're looking at a loop this direction. It's 50 miles. I work in Flagstaff now. Because I'm retired, I get to work another job because I have to make enough retirement money so I don't have to eat cat food. This is the reservation line here. Oh, actually right here. Can you see the difference in color? This is where we have range-starved cattle. Everything is overgrazed. So you still have some green on this side. GPS-wise, this is where everything happens, is on this road, from here to here. We have a young lady coming back from work. She gets off at midnight. 1 o'clock in the morning, she's heading home. She sees a red light up here between those two cinder cones. Now, we shot this during the daytime so you could get some idea of distance, and you know, don't want to just show you a black picture with a red dot in it. She looks at it and she says, "What's that helicopter doing hovering up there?" This is about 800 feet high right here. So as she goes by it, she sees this red dot come off, and it starts descending the slope and coming across here, and it's angling closer and closer toward her. She says it's, about the size of a medicine ball, I'd say. And it's red. And she says it's darker in the inside and lighter on the outside. As it's hovering, as it's going over here, she says you can see the ground light up underneath it. She comes to a curve right at the reservation line there. She has to take her eyes off the road, or off of this object, and pay attention to the road, otherwise she'll run off the road. This is looking back the other way, so it's coming off up here and down this way, and then following her. And as she looks over, she sees this thing, it turns white. And she says now what she's looking at is about the size of about a volleyball. And she says you can still see the underside lit up. She takes her cell phone out, her iPhone, and points it at this thing and tries to find it in the viewfinder, but it won't show up. She turns it back to the front, and she says you can clearly see the road. Turns it back, can't find it, even though it's lit up. So she gives up. She says it follows just a little behind her for about a quarter mile. And all of a sudden, it accelerates in front of her and zips up into the sky. She says it was a real fast right angle turn. And when she leaned over the steering wheel to look up through the windshield, she says this thing was shooting across the sky looking like a shooting star. So, the story doesn't end there. Chuck Modlin was with the MUFON STAR team. He's a physicist. Worked at Lawrence Livermore, worked at Sandia, worked at all the big labs. And he told us, take a compass and walk around this vehicle and see if there's any magnetic anomalies. Well, we found one right here. And we found the other one right here. And if you link those two together, it makes a path right through the driver. So people have speculated microwave energy, some other kind of particle beam energy that went through her. But irregardless, it was so strong that you could stand 3 feet away from the car and that needle would just pin right to that location. Shortly after, the young lady had alternator go out. This was a brand new car. Water pump went out. The radio started having problems. The computer went out. She took it back to the dealer and says, I want a different vehicle. And they traded it in and got her a different vehicle. We pulled the oil filter at MUFON's request, and they ran it through their spectral analysis. And it came up with this, sodium nitrite. This is the same stuff you get in hot dog water. Okay? The scientists tell us that this is not part of the makeup of oil, and it's not part of the makeup of the oil filter either. So they don't know how such a large amount of this ended up in the oil. This is her car. When she gets home, there's something sitting right here. Imagine, if you will, 3.5 to 4 foot tall rabbit. Okay? Now we're not talking about Looney Tunes here. She pulled up and she says that this thing is kind of a peppery brown, light tan color. It's just got black speckles all through it. No distinctive markings. She knows the difference between jackrabbits and she knows the difference between cottontails. As she's looking at this thing, she says that it has black eyes and the eyes don't blink. The ears go back at an angle from the head, straight back, and they're about this long. And they're both together. And the first thing that she says is, "Oh, I'm onto you, rabbit." And she sat there for a good half hour looking at this thing. She says it never moved, it never blinked. And so obviously she's a little bit freaked out by this thing. She calls her brother. Her brother's in Phoenix. Gets him on the phone and says, "I got this rabbit sitting in front of me. I'm scared to move." So she finally says, "I'm making a break for the house." She opens her door, steps out, backs up away from it, runs around the back side of that car, heads for the door, locks herself in. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she woke up with a horrible migraine headache. And she told me that she has never had a migraine in her life. She didn't know what a migraine was. Now she has them on a pretty regular basis. Okay. There it is. So, this ground here is hard as a rock. It's limestone bed with caliche clay on top. When you use caliche, you make pottery. When you bake it in the sun, it's hard. You can kick it and kick it and kick it with a boot, and it'll take you several attempts before you break the surface. But here at night, we have broken ground of something that was there. Later on, this young lady also, this one she photographed. This is an orb coming off a different hill near the reservation line. This thing is the size of a tractor trailer cab over. That's big. And she says it's, if you look at it real close, she says it's almost octagonal. Well, we could probably sit here and count sides, but that's what she said. I'm just quoting her. So, in that particular case, she's had other things happen to her. I touch base with her every now and then. She says this last winter, she turned a corner, leaving for work early in the morning before the sun came up. And there's this fresh snow on the ground. And in one of the neighbors' yards, they have a fence because they got dogs in there. And she says there's a little girl about 3.5 to 4 feet tall standing inside the fence on the corner in the dark. And she looked at her and she says she looked and there's no footprints. And she says, I wonder what that little girl's doing out, and but kept going. And I'm thinking, I didn't tell her this because I don't want to scare her any worse, but you've heard of what they call screenshot memory? Screenshot memory is when you see something and they put in your mind something that is not going to be totally freak you out and terrify you. So they basically put a screenshot of something else. So people see big flowers, giant butterflies, deer, owls. They put a lot of things like that in your mind so that you're not just wigging out. Apparently they don't want to scare us. Isn't that nice of them? Mother and daughter case, again, long highway out in the middle of nowhere. This is about where the whole incident, and for some of these where we have a lot of time, we go into all the details about, where this happened, the final positions. We map all this stuff out. And just to give you an idea, believe it or not, I am not a believer. And I don't like the term believer. Because when you say belief, we're in a church here. Belief is to accept something with no evidence. It's on faith, you're just believing it. Oh yeah, I believe it. I've never seen it, never touched it, never did anything. There's no evidence, but I believe it. And me and Stan, we deal with facts. We want to take these cases to court. So we use the same standard as evidence that would be going to court. And so we're very skeptical. I'm still at the point where I want to go up to a saucer and kick it and flip it over and look whose name is stamped on the bottom, see if it's made in China. So, we're skeptical, but when you do an investigation, you don't go into it with a preconceived idea. What you do is, it's like an accident investigation. You look at the evidence that you have. Then you go back and you see if the statements that people are making match up to the evidence that you've seen and you've interpreted. And then, you can tell exactly what happened. In this case, the mother's going down the road and she sees about 100 yards of lights light up out in the darkness. So what's the daughter doing sitting on the side? She's got her headphones in her ears. She's on the phone texting her friends. And the mother's going, daughter, calling her by name. I forgot what her name was. Finally, she gets her attention, probably whacks her one, but she can't say that these days. And she says, look. And the daughter looks up, and just then, the lights changed. And they said that this is about 3 stories tall, and that these lights are flashing, some of them, randomly flashing off and on. And they said that you could look through, it's almost like you could look inside. So that's Stan's best picture that he could come up with the idea of what these things look like. And then, as they watched, they saw this black dome appear and a flash and a sonic boom. And then behind them, the whole town of Chinle, which is one of the major towns on the reservation, completely lost power. So she says that when they got back home, there was a blizzard just suddenly appeared. And winds were so high, like 80, 90 mile an hour winds. And she said that fences were being knocked down, tiles were blown off the roofs, and they thought it was an apocalypse. They thought this was the end of the world. And, it really shook them up. At least this slide came out okay. We refer to it now as the Satan butt case, because we had a Macintosh computer when we did this, and the E got cut off on the end over here. And so this is Satan Butte, Arizona. It's up right near Lower Greasewood. And a gentleman was seeing an object going into this mesa, not around it, not over it. He said into the mesa. There's me and one of Bigelow's investigators again. They came out on this one. So he's seeing these lights every night, and he's watching them as they go across and they go into the mesa. Of course, he runs in and tells his wife, and she says, "I don't believe you," because that's what wives do. This is about the best picture that he took of it. He says it has a tail on it that's lit, and it's dragging it. He doesn't know if it's dragging on the ground or if it's near the ground. But he finally goes and gets himself a really nice camera in Flagstaff and comes back and starts taking these pictures. Then his wife believes him and then comes out and they start watching together. And they see this thing over and over, night after night. So one night, as he hears the horses in the corral, he raises horses. And the horses are blowing in the corral. For those of you who have been around horses, you know that if they're blowing, they're really upset about something. And he says all the horses are in one corner of the corral. And this object is sitting on the other side. The object he describes as a torpedo standing upright. And he had taken a pellet gun out with him, because if the dogs were bothering the horses, he's going to, put a few pellets in them. And he sees this thing. So, guys, what do? When you see something, you're down by the lakeside, you see something in the water, what do? You shoot it, you poke it with a stick, or you throw a rock at it, right? So he shoots it. He hears something go ping, and it zips off. And he sees it about a half mile away sitting by somebody else's house. So after that, he starts having skinwalkers visit his house. And he had so much activity that he finally said, "To heck with this, I'm moving." He moved. Now, this guy is Anglo, and he's married to a Navajo. He moved. He didn't move to the next town. He moved to the east coast of the United States. He would have gone further, I think, but he hit the ocean over there. So, we come, and this is Stan and my theories as to what's going on with a lot of this stuff. Now, there's an old Bigfoot picture. We're just using it as an illustration here because neither of us could draw Bigfoot real well. Bigfoot, if you think about him, is built like a tank. If you put a little gray alien down here and sent him off into the forest or up in the higher elevations where it's cold, he'd probably succumb to the environment. You put this guy out there, he's going to go through anything and come out, just fine. We think that what we found out over a lot of years is that when we started seeing increases in Bigfoot sightings, we saw corresponding increases in what we call flybys or UFO sightings. Flybys are, oh, I saw a light that was blinking, had a bunch of lights going around the middle, a sphere, and but it flew by. It didn't land, nothing came out, so it's a flyby, right? Just like a drive-by. And so we started seeing increases corresponding with each one. In UFO cases, Bigfoot has been associated with occupant sightings. We had one over in Crown Point where Bigfoot showed up with a UFO. Even hauntings. This is an illustration showing radiation from the sun. The sun comes and hits the earth, but we have an atmosphere, and it deflects a lot of the radiation around the earth. So that's just really basic grade school science. What's interesting is this is like a river, and if you're a fisherman like I am and fish for trout, you know that back here there's dead space, dead water. And we think that a lot of the hauntings, when you and I are composed out of energy, and when we die, that energy has to go somewhere. We think that it attaches to things that are nearby, whether it's objects, whether it's the earth, whether it's rocks, whatever. And interestingly enough, at the point right here where all this radiation has a void, it's about 3 a.m. in the morning. And this is when we have most of our haunting cases happening. So when we first started this, we started 2013. We spoke at the International UFO Congress in Arizona. And when we were there, we were the only ones. Before then, if you brought up UFOs, you didn't talk about Bigfoot. If you brought up Bigfoot, you didn't talk about UFOs. If you brought up paranormal cases and hauntings, you didn't talk about any of the other two. We started talking about all four of these subjects, and we linked them together through the idea of dimensions. And we were doing this back then. Within a couple of years, we started seeing TV shows talking about string theory and alternate universes and dimensions right next to us. According to string theory, there could be as many as 10 to 12 dimensions or an infinite number coexisting with us. So we started talking dimensions because in the Navajo creation story, it talks about a world of darkness down here, a world of insects, a world of animals, and of birds. Each one of these, the Navajo came through what we would call today a portal. The last one, they came through a reed, climbing up through a hole into this world, which they call the shining world. What if they were coming through dimensions and popped out in this dimension? You know, the Anasazi disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to them. What if they exited through another dimension? You know, we don't know. But it's an interesting theory. And it's the only one that kind of works with all of this stuff at the same time. Our universe is pretty vast. Those are galaxies. And, you know, we're just a small, tiny part of it. a planet within a galaxy. So there's a lot going on out in the universe, and we don't know. Okay, don't anyone have any seizures because I'm no longer a licensed EMT? We included this because we had, in speaking up on the Navajo reservation, we had person after person come to us telling us, I played with a Ouija board when I was young, when I was in high school, and it ruined my life. We had another girl come to us and said, it lies. So many people came to us about this, and when we talked to other paranormal people that were familiar with this, they said that the Ouija board is an unfiltered portal. That this portal, you're not guaranteed what's going to come through that portal, and it can hurt you. The Exorcist was based, that whole thing started in real life with a Ouija board. So here we see little girls all playing with the Ouija board. Isn't that nice? You can go to Target or Walmart or Toys R Us and get a pink one for your little girls. And what we tell people is, do not let your children play with these things. These are not toys, although they're marketed as toys. Isn't that a nice display? So, that's just our kind of our public announcement, to help everybody out. Don't play with these things. I had a minister that was a missionary in Borneo speaking at a church, and he was talking about his kids playing with one of these things. And they asked him, since we're in a church, I have to say this. The kids were saying, Dad, come over here. Ask the board something. So he asked it, do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God? And he says that board levitated, started spinning, and flew out the window. You draw your own conclusions. If something's going to levitate in my house, I don't want to be around it. We've run into a new interesting phenomenon, and you're going to need to kind of pay attention to this one because we're seeing more and more of it. Driving down the highway on the Beeline Highway going to Phoenix to speak, and we saw a shadow go over the roadway. And I'm laughing because both of us are cops. We're going down the road and we can pick out, I think the cop's going to be sitting right up there. And sure enough, that's where he's sitting, because that's where I'd sit if I was running traffic. So we see a shadow go over the freeway, and I says, Highway Patrol must be doing aircraft monitoring. And we both looked up. No airplane. We looked all over the place looking for this thing. We couldn't find it. So Stan has, more than a dozen times now, has had shadows go over his vehicle. And he's actually stopped, shut the vehicle off, jumped out and looked. And there's nothing in the air. Our thought, nothing to back it up, but our thought. We had a lady down in Phoenix coming out of the mall. She puts on polarized sunglasses, looks up and smacks her husband in the arm and says, look at that. He looks up and he says, I don't see nothing. She says, there's a disc up there, hovering. It's just sitting still. He says, I don't see it. She took her polarized glasses off and she couldn't see it anymore. In the past, they had dirigibles show up, or what people called dirigibles. Then we had the classic saucers. Later on, we had cigar shapes. I've seen a cigar, so they're pretty amazing stuff. Then we had triangles. And then after that, we had squares and orbs. What if the technology is getting to the point now where you can't see them anymore, but there's evidence that they're there? You know, we just think it's a progression, that all these things have changed over time, that we may be seeing another iteration. Maybe the UFOs are there, but we can't see them. There's a guy down in South America that uses essentially infrared filters and puts cameras side by side. And he can video, and you can see all these interesting things showing up on the infrared camera. We also experience streetlight interference. This is when you're driving down the road and the light suddenly goes out just as you go underneath it. Now, normally you'd say, coincidence, right? Or maybe it was my high beams, triggered the sensor on top. But when you start going down the road and 15 of them in a row, or even 30 of them in a row start going out, something's up. So, like I said, you have a light, you go underneath it, boing, it goes out. We went down to Scottsdale to speak, Scottsdale, Arizona, and we went to because we don't get to see malls very often. It was so funny because we're walking down the mall, and I saw, have you seen those places where they sell hair extensions? So they got all these hair hanging, and I go like this, and I said, look, they're selling scalps. That's a real indigenous joke. Anyway, we got into the parking garage, and there's these fixtures over the top. We parked under one, and just as we got out of the doors, this thing exploded. And you could just smell all the burnt stuff in there, the ozone. So again, more street lights. This is a case that Stan worked on. What they do is they take an area, put a ball in the middle of it, and start sprinkling talcum powder around in a haunting case. This had the imprint of a human foot on it, a child's foot. And he said it was so detailed that you could see the whorls on the toes, just like a fingerprint. We had a ball that was placed here, and it started rolling on its own. It rolled out the door, it went down the hall, went up the stairs, and into another office, and it was in the trash can. There's another footprint. That one is flat. That's a moccasin print of a child again. Stan got to work early one morning, and he saw this in the glass between the two offices. You can see the face right here. There was nobody in the building with him. We've had these guys show up. These are your men in black. They're not wearing black. It's our experience that these are special forces operators. They're Navy SEALs. They're force recon. They're military types that are in special operations. They didn't know we took their picture. They are sitting there. They're wearing BDUs. They're wearing polo shirts. They have a uniform, just like this. They've got a big TV on the wall over on this side. And they're not looking at the TV. They're on the phone talking to whoever. They showed up. This is right after the old man case. This is the very next day when we were eating breakfast. These guys were over there. There was a sign on the marquee of the hotel that said, "Welcome NASA scientists." We had MUFON call their people that are hidden in NASA. And NASA said there is no NASA scientific meeting in Window Rock. We also took a picture of their car. We like doing that kind of stuff just to rattle people's cages. But special operators have a certain look. Both Stan and I, being in SWAT teams and having trained at Gunsight, are very familiar with Navy SEALs, with Delta Force, Green Berets, all these kind of people. We train in firearms with them and we train them. Even in Gallup on the news, they had a UFO show up at an air show. This chair rolled about 20 feet across the stage. There's a big table over here for meetings. We started having, during the investigation of this one building, over 2 nights, we had 65 coins appear, what they call an apport. An apport is when something materializes out of thin air and drops into our existence. This coin was one of them. 65 coins landed, they bounced, they rolled, they spun around, they even hit people in the back. 65 coins that were collected. Stan called me up in the middle of this thing and he says, what should I do? And I told him, I says, as an investigator, you have to mark the location of every coin that fell, and you had to measure from the walls to give it a grid coordinate. And when you get done, then you're going to know exactly where that coin was. And he had to do that 65 times. Plus, he had to photograph each one. So he wasn't too happy about that. So these are some of the coins. These coins dropped over a friend of his head. Boom. Scattered. Out of 65 coins, every one of them landed heads up. That's a statistical impossibility. And we still have the coins. This coin appeared on Stan's countertop at his house. And he said he heard the ping. And when you look at it, we're hoping this means that we're going to go to Taiwan one of these days. That's a Taiwanese 2 yuan coin. There's one that dropped during the middle of a meeting while he was there. So this kind of activity kind of follows people around. There's one at the hotel room where he was staying. Again, heads up. And this is the most interesting one. We were at the International Congress in Phoenix. A gentleman is talking to another guy. The room is clearing out. They had just finished listening to Colonel Halt talking about Rendlesham Forest. And as these two were talking, they're the only ones in there. And one of them feels something hit him in the side of the leg. And he just reaches down, picks up these 2 coins, sticks it in his pocket, didn't even look at them. The next day, they were saying, where are the Navajo Rangers? We need the Navajo Rangers. So we went over there and he says, these coins, they hit me in the leg. They were 1 pound English coins. That's the backside. And he was pretty freaked out, and we told him, "You're okay." They both landed heads up, by the way. We said, "You're okay. You know, put them in a picture frame, put it on your mantle, keep it as a souvenir." You know, I don't think he wanted to give us, what's the rate now? About $2 a piece. I didn't think he wanted to give us any money. This was taken up in Lukachukai. We call this the flying onion. And no, that's not a insect flying by or anything else. That is, the MUFON tells me that the haze that you're seeing around that thing, the distortion, is the drive for the ship. Interesting that it has something hanging down on the bottom too, just like the guy over in Lower Greasewood. This guy was setting up a trail cam in order to see what kind of animals would come by. He's a deer hunter, so he's looking for animals. That night, that triggered it. If you go back and forth between the two, you can get an idea where that thing was. Right about there. So he caught a UFO on camera. So we talk about our personal experience. Me and Stan are going for a body recovery up on Lake Powell on my favorite boat. And it gets night. So being the good guys we are, we camp out, which we hate to do. But Motel 6 wasn't around the corner of the lake. As we're sitting there, we're laying, we know how to camp. We have cots. And, you know, I'm not going to lay on the ground with them snakes or scorpions. And as we're looking up at the star field, we see this. And it's followed by 2 jets on full afterburner. And as those jets tried to catch up to this thing, all it did was speed up even faster. And it went so fast, it was over at the horizon in no time. And me and Stan looked at each other and we said, "Did we just see what we saw?" And he says, "Yep." And I says, "Those were F-15s. He says, "How do you know?" I says, "They're single engine. Hornet would have 2 engines in the back, so you'd see 4 afterburners going." I had a orb follow me in my, that was my truck. I loved it. Had to turn it in when I retired. That thing followed me for 30 miles. And it veered off and went about a mile away, and it sat up on the mesa tops and paralleled my course. Toward the end, I started feeling really like this was not good. This feeling that there's something malevolent that could attack you. And that's the only time I've ever felt like that. Stan gets followed by something like that. That's running alongside the side of his vehicle as he's doing about 65. He says he floored it. He says he was just out of college, got home, and this thing is running along. He says it jumped over the fence, the right-of-way fence, and started paralleling and then running alongside his car. He says when you looked at it, its eyes were red, like they were backlit. And he says he just scooted down in his seat lower and lower until he could just barely see over the dash and just took off. He says he got home, he skidded into the driveway, you know, the gravel, and he ran inside. And his dad says, "What the heck's the matter with you?" And he explained what he saw. And his father says, "That's a skinwalker." So Stan was doing an investigation in another building that was haunted, and this scratch. He watched it as it appeared on his arm. It just like. Now, believe it or not, we have a personal life. After all that time and fun, we finally caught up with E.T. and he charged us $5 a piece to take a picture with him. I dance in the powwows. I'm what they call Southern Straight Dancer. And I also dance, this is the Kiowa Apache Blackfoot Society. Our traditional enemies used to be the Blackfoot tribe. We captured 4 of their staffs way back at the early 1800s. And those staffs are used in ceremonials now. They're used for healing. So that's me, that's my uncle. As you can tell, he was a Marine. Credited by his commanding officer with killing over 200 enemy soldiers, 200 Viet Cong. The way he would do it is he never lost a man out of his squad in Vietnam the entire time he was there. The only one in his battalion. When he was there, he would suddenly, they're coming. Everybody get ready, they're coming. He couldn't tell anybody how he knew. Everybody would get ready and they'd wax him. So he just had this sixth sense about him. And the lieutenant colonel told us later he was adopted into our family and told us about him. I play guitar. That's my acoustic. I've got electrics too. Stan plays. Can you guess what kind of music he plays? And we spoke in Scotland at Stirling for the Stirling Paranormal Festival. And people about fell out of their chairs just screaming and laughing when we showed this picture. Because Peter Brogham, the guy that did the movie Rob Roy and discovered I Am Neeson, invited us to come speak. And I'm a soccer fan, so I said, send us your soccer jersey. So this is what he sent us. This is the Celtics. There are 2 teams in Scotland, the Celtics and the Rangers. And they are mortal enemies. And to have the Navajo Rangers wearing Celtic jerseys, it was just too much for the crowd. So we would like to thank all of these people, and we're going to add your guy's name to this list. Oh yeah. Clifford's a good friend of ours. Travis Walton's a good friend. Dual C, of course. Open Minds. Yeah, it's kind of like a who's who of who. But, we have a lot of fun with this stuff. One of the reasons we started speaking about this, just for your knowledge, we decided to go down to the International Congress and go take a look at all the crazy people. We got down there and we started talking to people, and they found out that we've investigated these things, and they said, oh my God, you need to be speakers. And at first we thought, not us, I'm not going to, set myself up for ridicule. And after a while, I told Stan, I says, I'm getting too old to worry about what people think about me. For those of you who are interested, I'm in my 60s. So I says, forget it. I says, let's go ahead and speak. So we spoke at MUFON. We didn't realize Alejandro Rojas was sitting in the audience taking notes, and he invited us the next year to speak at the International Congress. And from there, we are the best thing that's not, you can't really contact us. I don't know how to put this. Being cops, this is how you can contact us, but being cops, we do not put we're not on Facebook, we're not on Twitter, we're not on any of these things, because we don't put ourselves out there. That's just how it is. And we don't have a website, we don't have a blog, or whatever it is that's out there. I don't even have service out where I live. We don't even have internet. So it's no use having any of that stuff. You know, I've got Verizon where I can 50 miles away, so it might take a minute to load a page. But we get our information out like this, old school or analog, and we try to answer everybody. In January, we spoke in Laughlin. That video is called, from Starworks, is called What the Navajo Rangers Saw. And you're gonna see a picture of Gollum on the front. We didn't ask them to put that on there. They did that themselves. And they misspelled the word two. They put TWO. So, you know, a lot of people are writing in saying, you know, oh, you guys are so stupid. You know, well, we didn't do that. But in 3 months, it's had, for an hour presentation, it's had 975,000 views. All over the world. It's averaging 2,000 to 3,000 views a day. So, but we're not going to see anything out of that when it hits 1 million. So, I thank you for your attention. I will be hanging around here and answering questions, so I don't know how you guys usually do this.
Yeah, first of all, let's give him a big hand.
So it's no. Okay. John, thanks a million for coming. Appreciate it. So John, why don't you tell the audience who you are and what you did for 30 years?
Okay, my name is Jonathan Dover. I was in law enforcement for 31 years. 27 of those years were with the Navajo Nation. And I was a criminal investigator, had been training in Glencoe, Georgia, at Federal Law Enforcement Training Center for that. I was an archaeological specialist doing crimes, one of only 2 in the Western United States. I was also a licensed EMT, the only uniformed officer that was ever licensed to do that before or since. And me and Stan, my buddy down here, we got assigned to investigate paranormal cases on the Navajo Nation lands. And we did that for 11 years. We didn't ask to do this, but I like to say we were voluntold. And, but the rest is history. We investigated them just like any law enforcement case, with an idea that it was going to go to prosecution and a judge was going to have to see it and a jury was going to have to approve of it. So we had to be 99.9% sure that what we were seeing out there and recording was the truth. That's why you get into law enforcement. You're after the truth. So we did that diligently until I retired in 2011. Stan is still working for the tribe as a senior investigator for another department. And so his work carries on. He's got about 100 cases behind right now from his predecessor. So in the meantime, I've been able to get on Skinwalker Ranch and Ancient Aliens. And just for everybody, I'm going to put a plug out right now. If everybody watches Netflix Unsolved Mysteries, you will see me and Stan on there. It just came out on October 25th, right before Halloween, and it's an episode called Paranormal Rangers.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, were there any parameters around, okay, you guys can do this, but you can't do this on your investigations?
We didn't have a mechanism to investigate paranormal cases. So Bigfoot cases went under wild animal complaints. We had to be very, just kind of make it up as we go along. And the cases were all locked down. Only we and the director of the Rangers had access to them. Since then, unfortunately, the system, the computer-aided dispatch and records management system was overhauled. They put in a whole new system, and none of the information could be migrated over. But me and Stan, somewhere in our computer hard drives and everything else, still have copies of our cases.
Oh, thank you.
We just have to find them.
So the investigations, were they tribal or were they federal? Were they under BIA or?
They were all tribal.
Tribal.
Yeah,
So they belong to the tribe.
they belong to the tribe.
So are they publicly accessible?
No, they are not.
Is there
one-
some mechanism to see them?
One of the things that we did when we spoke to Navajo people is we guaranteed their anonymity. And to do that, we had to keep their names out of the reports. We even, in some cases, we kept the locations out of the reports because they were so fearful that, and it's really interesting, there's a cultural component here that people don't realize. Navajos, along with a lot of other Indian tribes, have a history of visitations by star people. And when we ask them, why don't you report these things to MUFON? They tell us if we report those, then a whole bunch of people are going to come out here and the visitors will no longer come here. And we don't want that. Because to them, these are deities.
When you say a deity, what does that mean?
Their star people are people who have come to the Navajos and other Indian tribes to impart knowledge.
So are they considered friendly?
That's hard to say. I'm not going to commit to that one way or the other. We've seen a little bit of both. And we've seen so many different types of craft up there. I have personally seen cigars, saucers, triangles, squares, pill shapes, orbs, and in one case I got followed by one for over 40 minutes while I was on the road at 2 in the morning. So I thought about turning around, and I thought the consequences of doing that might not be very good, so I just kept going. There's a lot of stuff going on, at least until I put a camera in my window. And then now I don't see them anymore, and I'm okay with that.
So let's start going down the line. Cattle mutilations.
We don't have a good handle on cattle mutilations. The reason why is our land up there is open range. So unlike other ranchers that have a fenced area and they can keep an eye on their cattle, our cattle just run all over the place. And when it comes auction time, you go out and try to find them, which is a whole sport all by itself. Then when you get them rounded up, you have to make sure you got the right brands on them, or maybe you don't. And then you get them to the market, and hopefully the state brand inspector will pick it up if it's got a different somebody else's brand on it. Usually the animals are not checked every day. So we'll get a case of a dead cow maybe a month after it happened, and there's no information there.
Did you ever investigate some of those classic mutilations where the area around the lips are gone, the anal cavity's gone, no blood, etc.?
We'd heard of a few of them, but we never got to investigate any.
Okay. And how about people reporting actual abductions by the deities? Would they ever say that?
They never actually said that they were abducted, but we had ground occupant sightings on several occasions.
And you'd write those up?
We're in the process of writing those. Yeah, those got written up, but we're in the process of writing a book,
Okay.
or 2 books actually.
Okay.
And so we're working on it right now. I'm about a third of the way through the book. And those cases, without the names and the locations, will be talked about.
And Bigfoot, is that related in your world to the deities?
Bigfoot is related sometimes to the deities, and more often they're related. What we've seen is correlations in UFO case increases when we have Bigfoot increases. And we have a lot of cases involving Bigfoot. Also, and just for everybody's information, we have Navajo skinwalker cases. Those cases, we found out through interviews, can be mixed up either way. It could be talking about a Bigfoot and then turn into a skinwalker case, or vice versa.
So at Skinwalker Ranch, there was a story in the book written by Colin Kelleher and George Knapp where the researchers were on the property and they saw like a window frame above a pasture open and a Bigfoot type creature crawl out, fall onto the pasture and run off. Now when you talk about what John D'Souza did in my movie, where parallel dimensions, and I've heard you talk about this at Skinwalker Ranch, is that Bigfoot in your world or in your beliefs coming out of a parallel dimension down into ours? And if that's the case, what's the mechanism for it to go back to their dimension?
We've actually investigated numerous Bigfoot cases. We've seen some where we've tracked it from the location where the sheep was stolen or whatever. 5-foot strides, heel to heel. Good deep impressions, 21-foot or 21-inch footprints. Went up a hill, 45-degree hill. Me and Stan had to crawl up on our hands and our feet. It just walked up that thing. We tracked it for essentially over a mile, and the tracks disappear in trackable ground. Now, me and Stan are both trackers. We're what you call combat trackers. So we track bad guys. And, you know, to this day, I don't deer hunt, I don't elk hunt, because they say that once you've hunted man, there's nothing else that's exciting. So I've hunted man my whole career. And the tracks just disappear almost like the thing was jerked up into the sky. So we turn around and track the other direction. Track to where it came in. Same thing. The tracks just appear in trackable ground. I've had that occur on a couple of different occasions where I've tracked it. And you're just sitting there scratching because you start spiraling out. You're looking for sign. You're looking for stuff like even a pebble pushed into the ground to find that track, and it's not there.
Have you ever had a tribal member say that they were watching one and saw it disappear?
I've interviewed a couple of tribal members that had said that, but they were with different tribes. And they said that they had personal encounters with Bigfoot. And they said that one guy said that he was watching it by a tree, and he says it just faded out and disappeared.
So in your world of the Navajos and their belief system and their elders, what would the elders say happened there?
The elders tell us never to look Bigfoot in the eye because he can take control of your mind that way. Now, this is what medicine men say. We think, and this is just speculation, this is our opinion, but we think that Bigfoot uses infrasound. And this is sound that you cannot register for the human ear. You can't hear it, but it still affects you. So we've seen a lot of things out there, UFOs just disappearing, just fading out and disappearing. UFOs that are popping into existence with a pop so loud that it'll go through people like a physical force. And they come and tell us they're not believers in UFOs, but then they looked up in the sky right above their house and there's one sitting there.
Okay, so hold on. In Missing 411 The Hunted, there's a man, 80 years old, and he's hunting with a series of men that are separated about 100 yards apart. One of the sounds that the person heard was this clank or pop sound. And they could never say for sure if it was related to the man missing, but it was one of those odd sounds they heard in the woods that they couldn't correlate to a normal sound in the woods. So now what are you saying about that sound?
Our speculation is that these things are popping into our plane of existence from a parallel or another dimension, and they're arriving here. We think that maybe they're generating so much energy to do this that they only have a certain amount of time, and then they just fade out or they just disappear. We think Bigfoot is exactly the same way, that he can step in and out of dimensions. He is a pan-dimensional being, and that he can walk in and out when he pleases.
Would any of the elders believe that Bigfoot is related to the UFOs?
I believe so. Bigfoot goes back to the late 1600s with the Navajos. They have a story in a place called Coyote Canyon, north of Gallup, where they saw a Bigfoot. By that time, Indians had horses and they had rope lariats made out of horsehair. And they rode around this thing and they roped it. And they said it sat down on the ground and they could hear it talk to them in their own language. And it said, I didn't mean to disturb you. I'm going north up to Mesa Verde area. And if you'll just let me go up there, I will not come back and bother you again. So they rode with it between them all the way up to Colorado. And they released it up there. So that's the story that the medicine men tell us, that of incidents involving Bigfoot.
So you brought up Mesa Verde. So you opened a can of worms here. So I did a special for the History Channel called Vanished. Anybody see that? Oh, perfect, thanks. So in there, we talked to some national park people. And we said, what happened to all the people here? They couldn't explain it. They said all these people had a good existence, they had good food, they were living in the cliffs. One day they were there, the next day they were gone. Any thoughts about that?
The Navajo have an origin story that says that they started in a world of darkness. They went into a world of light that had insects, and then they went into another world that had aquatic animals. Another world had monsters, giants. And they saw a hole in the sky. They put a couple, they say reeds, but I'm thinking some kind of structure against this hole and climbed up these reeds into another world. And they came out into this world, which is called the Shining World. So in a place called Dineta, which is the emergence place. So the Navajos have said that, and a lot of other Indian tribes in the United States and Canada, and we're talking over 570 tribes in the United States and a like number in Canada and First Nations, have similar stories that they came from somewhere else. So when we started to look at this, we reinterpreted that with the idea that they may have come through dimensional gates to the present world. And it kind of holds up with everything that we're seeing.
Interesting, because what you're saying matches up with what Harvey Pratt and I did for several years when we visited multiple tribes and talked to them about their belief system of Bigfoot. One thing, we never met a tribe that said that they thought Bigfoot was an ape or a gorilla. Nobody ever thought that. But they thought that it was a spiritual being that lived in multi-dimensions. And it could travel back and forth. And when it was here, it was flesh and blood. But when it left, there was nothing. And then they also walked into that topic of star creatures and believing that the people came from the stars. And the one thing that I have a difficult time with researchers that call themselves researchers is discounting the beliefs from 560 tribes that essentially all say the same thing across the US and Canada. And there's some shows on TV that I don't think give enough credence to what you're saying, especially from somebody who's lived there and done it from a pragmatic point of view, from a trained investigative professional like you and Stan. Now, when you were on Skinwalker Ranch, something that struck me is you were on a rock formation, and you said this was an evil place. Was that the word you used?
Well, to put it in context, we looked at that place, and to me, it was a place of religious service. They were holding ceremonies there to keep back what they perceived as evil on the ranch side. And so this was kind of like an outpost location to hold prayers in, to stave off what they perceived as evil. Didn't mean it was evil. It just means that that's what they thought it was. But it's kind of interesting that when the team left there, the reason, I'll let you explain the reason they left, that they said it was demonic.
So it's no big secret is that the government officials left there claiming that it was demonic. What did you think about that?
I think we tend to interpret things based on our backgrounds, and we look at things through that window. We grew up in a religious country. You know, Martin Luther came over here, he wanted religious freedom, et cetera, et cetera. The powers that be actually divided up the Indian nations in the United States into spheres of influence that the Catholics could have, the Mormons could have, Christian Reform, all the other religions, all claimed part of the United States as their own. And Native American tribes are the only people in the world that have to give up their culture to be a Christian. And, you know, to me that's sad, because we have a vibrant, living culture that's disappearing even as we speak here. The language is going, the traditions are going, and I think that I can be a Christian and still have a culture.
So you just watched my movie. The explanation about German elk hunters in a specific region, and there's no other nationality other than German that are missing, no other hunters other than elk hunters. Now, when you and Stan have investigated criminal activity and things, I realize that certain tribes have a lot of crime. And I'm not talking about crime, I'm going to rob you. I'm talking about really unknown type disappearances, like I've explained here in the movie and in my past movies. Have you guys investigated disappearances on your land that may parallel what I'm talking about in the movie?
Well, unfortunately, the rangers are doing resource law enforcement. We're doing the forestry, the game and fish, mines, minerals, water resources, search and rescue, that kind of stuff. We do get involved in search and rescue operations. When it comes to the investigations, the police take over that. The Rangers, at the time I was there, only had about 15 officers. Navajo police had about 250. And they have a dedicated criminal investigation unit. So we would defer to them to any investigations. And once we were done, we were so busy we never follow up on any of those. We've got enough work to do without following up on cases. And it's one thing that I found out in police work when I was at Winslow. If you follow cases, you tend to get frustrated because people don't go to jail. They get released the next day. So you just kind of take it as I did my job, the person went to jail, I did my paperwork, my job's done. Whatever the judge does, whatever the jury does, that's up to them. And I'm not going to worry about it.
So you also investigated livestock crime, right?
Yes.
So were there any cases where there was, say, a pen of sheep and unexplainably, say, part of that group just disappeared?
What we had was Bigfoot attacks on sheep. We had one case where the sheep in the corral were literally grabbed onto, and from the collar, the skin was pulled off. And to put that in perspective, one of the things that trained engineers fear is to hit a flock of sheep, because the wool is so tough and the skin is so tough that it'll wind up in the trucks and the train will derail. That's how tough that skin is. And yet this thing just ripped the skin right off the back.
Did you find tracks inside?
The rangers that investigated that case didn't report any tracks, but they weren't looking. They were just taking the animal damage complaint. But they came back and spoke to us about it, and they were just completely perplexed.
Are there any predators that could have done that damage?
Absolutely not. Not even a bear.
So what would your result explanation to that community be?
We think it was a Bigfoot because we were getting reports of Bigfoot all through that area. Hunters have encountered them. They've shot at them. We had so many reports, our department had an unofficial no-shoot policy because we didn't want our officers seeing something and shooting at it and finding a guy in a zipper suit. So we said, no, absolutely not, unless it's attacking you or attacking somebody else, you will not shoot at it.
So the sheep that were attacked, was there actual predation to it? Were they eaten or?
I believe some of them had disappeared.
Oh, that some had.
Yeah.
What's the feeling of the owner? Do they have, if it's a Native American, do they have some knowledge that this may be a Bigfoot?
A lot of the Navajos already are very aware of Bigfoot, and to them it's just normal. They have this idea that Bigfoot exists out there, it lives out there occasionally, and it's heard and seen, but you're not to have anything to do with it. You just leave it alone, let it on its own. Now what's happening is we're seeing people going out there searching for Bigfoot. And we don't know what the result of that's going to be. But with all the TV shows coming out, we figure that somebody's going to run into one and it's not going to turn out well.
was there ever an incident in your knowledge, not directly meaning you investigated it, but had you ever heard of from another investigator where a Bigfoot attacked somebody?
We had, Stan investigated one case where, I think it was one or two girls. Two girls got off the bus at the bus stop, and they live a quarter mile away from the bus stop, so they walk home on a dirt road. And on their way home, a Bigfoot came out and chased them. And so you imagine being a little child and just running from this monstrous hairy thing. They got home, and the brother was home, and they told him, what had happened. He ran out the front door and he saw it. So, and then it took off.
So no actual contact.
Yeah, some contact
Some
there.
contact.
Yeah. And we had another one that was reported. This one is real interesting. One of our jails, the jails are from the 1960s. So no ventilation system, just old-fashioned jails. And they're supposed to get all destroyed. Some of them were shut down. But they had a drunk tank in there, and the prisoners were all in there sleeping it off late at night. The jailers opened the back door to the building so that air can come in. And one of the jailers heard screaming from down the jail. And so they went down there to investigate, and all the prisoners were into one corner of the cell, as far away from the bars as they could get. And they asked them, what the heck's the matter with you guys? And they said either a skinwalker or a Bigfoot had come in. They said it was covered with hair and stood there at the bars looking at them, and then walked out the back door.
That would be punishment enough.
I would have given up drinking.
Yeah. I'm guessing that there was no cameras.
No. This is probably late 80s when this happened. Officers out there, they don't have camera systems. They don't, even to this day, most of them don't even have body cams.
Oh.
Me and Stan were carrying little recorders on us, body cams, since about 2008. But we had to buy our own off of eBay.
Wow. So getting back to Skinwalker Ranch, they left because their belief is that it was demonic. You kind of attributed that to a belief system that maybe that's what we were bred with, learned through life.
Right.
So if you just take off that word demonic, what is it?
I think it's pan-dimensional beings that are coming through, that there's a portal or a gateway there to another dimension. And one of the things that me and Stan have been talking about is if you look at Nikola Tesla, he had this thing about the numbers 3, 6, and 9. He gave each one an attribute. He said 3 represents energy, 6 represents frequency, 9 represents the vibration. And if you have all 3 of those, he says you can do anything. So I started thinking we have energy at Skinwalker Ranch, right? They've said that the ground is conductive. It's like a battery, or it could, in my view, it's a capacitor. A capacitor is an electronic device that can store energy and under certain situations release it suddenly. They have frequency, 1.64 gigahertz, that they've seen over and over. But they don't have the vibration yet in order to manipulate whatever it is that's out there.
So let's say that you and Stan were assigned to investigate there. Since you've already been there, have you ever left and had that hitchhiker effect? Something follow you home?
I have not, and I attribute that to prayer and smudging. We do that after every case. We do that, like tonight, I'm speaking about this subject, so I'll be smoking myself tonight after I get back and saying my prayer for protection.
And smudging is,
Smudging is using sweetgrass or cedar or sage, white sage. And they're finding out that these smoke has a microbial effect. But you take that smoke and you put it over you and you cover yourself in the smoke. And when you're praying, you're basically asking for protection, but it's with an intent. So it doesn't work if you just go through the motions. You can go into the most fanciest church and kneel down and put your hands up, and it's not going to have any effect. You have to have the intent that that thing is going to do what you need it to do, and that's what we do. So I've got my little smudge kit back at the place, and me and Stan are going to smoke ourselves.
so this isn't meant to invade your privacy. This is, and if you don't want to answer it, please don't answer it. Just say it's private. But for my own knowledge, is this a prayer to Jesus Christ, to God, to who?
It can be, most Native Americans pray to the Creator. I am born again Christian, so I pray through Jesus Christ. But it's the same thing. You have that prayer, you have the intent that it's going to protect you. And Native Americans, they don't want us to use that part of our culture because it's seen as something that's savage, something from the past, and you're not supposed to hold on to the past. But you see the Catholic Church with the priest with the urn,
Right.
blessing people with
Yes.
that. A lot of different religions all over the world use smoke in their ceremonies. So I don't see anything wrong with that.
To that point, when we did Vanished, Harvey did a ceremony with us where he used sweetgrass and he brought it around the room and brought it around us so that we were protected when we went out.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I understand that. And I wonder if anyone who has been victimized by that hitchhiker effect hasn't come to somebody and said, hey, how can I protect myself and my family from this? Because it seems like it's, when you read the books that Knapp and Kelleher have written, it's had some serious side effects to those people. I wonder if anyone who's ever done that has still had that hitchhiker effect.
The Navajos have a term called hojo. It means balance. It recognizes that there's evil in the world. It recognizes that there's good. It says that there has to be a balance between the two, and you have a social responsibility to choose to be good, not to go over that evil side. I find that very refreshing because unlike other places where they say we have to eradicate evil, it recognizes that evil does exist. And it just says you have to be balanced. And that's what we're trying to do with smudging, is we're trying to maintain that balance in our lives. So it's helpful. It really does help.
Jonathan, the first time I ever heard you speak and heard a stand, I immediately thought you were an extremely credible person. And the way you present yourself and the way you handle yourself, you are a great representative to your people. And I hope that you continue to have a venue to get these words out. And I'm very blessed that you came tonight, and I appreciate you talking to us.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me. Just for everybody's information, when I got here, Dave had contacted me through email, and he said it's a Western cowboy type dress-up thing. And he says, so just so you know, and I says, oh, great. I says, me and Stan are going to come as Indians. So it's okay because we're used to being surrounded. And, we came as ourselves. So.